Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. The Lankavatara. I think I'm going to spend a little time going through the Lankavatara Sutra. I've talked about the Lankavatara before. I've quoted from it. I have some older videos about it, as I do on the Diamond Sutra. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, except to mention that many of you will recognize the Lankavatara as one of the the deeply respected works of Buddhism in its entirety, of Mahayana Buddhism more specifically, but also a divergent point in the sectarianism of Buddhism. Some view this the Zen sect, the Chan sect in China, view the Lankavatara as seminal in their thinking, amongst other works. Works that come from different central figures other than Shakyamuni Buddha, which is something Nichiren takes great exception to, right? And we know, as Lotus Sutra Buddhists, we understand that the Lankavatara and its translations can be interpreted like anything, in a clear path or an unclear path, and can lead to many assumptions. Fortunately, you and I can investigate the Lankavatara from the perspective of Shakyamuni's culminating teachings of the Lotus Sutra. So, to us, as we read the Lankavatara, a lot of stuff will just resonate very clearly. Oh, yeah, there it is, there it is, there it is, right? And there'll be sections where we'll be like, what? That sounds like word salad again. And who's translating this anyway? Because we'll hear the kernel of truth in it, and we'll also hear where are you going with this? But so much of it is beautifully written and translated and corresponds with the consistency of Shakyamuni's teachings. So yeah, it's a very important Mahayana text. And that's why I thought, let's go ahead and dive into it. And I have a translation here that I got from an Indian press in New Delhi, or Delhi. And it claims to be the first translation. And it came with a picture, a reproduction of a picture of somebody who's reputed to be Bodhidharma, which, as you know, Zen Buddhists claim as their primary teacher, their patriarch. Yeah. I come to Bodhidharma from martial arts, and that makes me chuckle a little bit, because my introduction to Bodhidharma was through Shaolin. Many of you have heard of the Shaolin temples, and of course the legend of the physical prowess and gung fu, the hard work of and Tai Chi Chuan even traces to the roots of the sinew and tendon strengthening exercises. devised by Bodhidharma, right? He was an Indian monk who arrived in Shaolin through my exposure of him as somebody to revolutionize the practice of the monks in northern China, to strengthen them, to give them physical stamina to be able to meditate properly. They were so emaciated and constantly being burgled and robbed by marauders and what do you call people who just wander the countryside, coming in and stealing their rice and vilifying them. That old thinking that monks are recluses in a building and they don't interact much with society, if at all, other than to beg for sustenance. It wasn't working out real good for him. And Bodhidharma was a monk who introduced Buddhist thinking to the Taoist priest or monks. And so Bodhidharma was in an interesting position of melding what was already culturally and deeply valuable to the monks of the day, Taoism, and their understanding of the duality of nature, and introducing to them the Buddhist concept, which was much larger and encapsulated what they knew in Taoism. So it was a very nice fit. And but also you could see how that would make Bodhidharma a negotiator, a middle ground, if you will. Not completely Buddhist, but a Buddhist encapsulating Taoism and finding a middle ground to enlighten and to assist the monks of the day in northern China. And one of the first things he had to do was to create some health, some vigor in these people. And so his biggest contribution, I would argue, because I come to this man through, and his legend and his lineage through martial arts. And so by training the monks how to work with their bodies and regain their mental acuity through their physical development, well, this is the foundation of all martial arts, isn't it? And India was no stranger to martial arts either. They had their forms. So it wasn't like Bodhidharma showed up on the scene and go, what do I do about this? He already had pre-knowledge. This wasn't new to him, but it was quite new to the monks of the time in China. And the Shaolin legend is, legend, yes? So this is how I came to know Bodhidharma long before I dove into Mahayana Buddhism. So from my perspective, it's really obvious in the Lankavatara how this thing that Mahayana Buddhism dissects so well, the physical nature of life, interdependent and intermixed with the spiritual aspect of life, is where we reside as human beings, yes? As we go on and develop our understanding of that in Buddhism as in martial arts, the spiritual component becomes far more obvious and predominating, and the physical aspect of life becomes a double-sided thing, that dualism again, a tool of enlightenment as well as a function of keeping the Dharma going, right? Because as I've used the analogy of a switch on in the attic, you turn the light on in the attic, that's great. But if you turn the light on in the attic and that's it, then there's no reason to continue maintaining the device of the attic. You either throw everything out or you recategorize, you find things of value, then they come out of the attic. If they're of no value, then they're not needed. And so the whole idea of having an attic to illuminate becomes, Do you see what I'm saying? So if everything is enlightenment, then why have samsara? And this is the danger at this point of teaching, of the idea that we don't need all this stuff. So annihilate it. That nihilism that carries out of many sectarian views from the Hinayana period, that to be happy means just get rid of all the stuff you're attached to. But that's not what Shakyamuni was teaching. But it's easy to slip into that, right? Let me just be the solitary monk in a cave. But that's not complete, perfect enlightenment. Complete, perfect enlightenment is the engagement, constantly the engagement, but remaining mentally enlightened while participating in the engagement of the physical world. Because without the physical world, what is there to enlighten? It's almost a conundrum, but the beauty of it, and what Buddhism, and I've said this many, many times, the purpose of Buddhism isn't to evaporate into some spiritual holy place. That's the province of a religion. And the consistent factor of religion is the annihilation of the body. The enunciation, right? Everything goes to this paradise. And Shakyamuni says, man, that's one way to suffer your whole life. I don't want to know how to evaporate. I want to know how to live in this life free from the things that make me stress and anxious and all of that. That's the suffering I want to be rid of. I don't want to be rid of life. Life is amazing. Well, no religion teaches that. And that's why I constantly remind people, no, Buddhism isn't truly a religion. Buddhism is about seeing the nature of life correctly while being in the foibles. That's what being a bodhisattva is. A conscious, physical presence, a mind emergent from that physical presence that isn't hampered by identification, possession, loss, all of those things. That's part of the physical life, just like planets and stars and so on are in the universe. But when you back off and look at the universe as the process that it is, it's mind-bogglingly, if I can get my mouth to work, amazing. That's where we want to be. That's the paradise. That's the pure land. Be in it and appreciate it for its process of being. You can't take your mind and put it elsewhere. Where are you going to go? See, Buddhism just uses sheer logic, reason, and rationale and says, you are where you are. Be everything that you are now without hanging on to this ridiculous idea of dragging the past along with you. The past is gone. You can look at your memories of the past with fondness, fine. But if you're attached to it, if you can't let it go, then you're not living anymore. Live this life. That's where all the magnificence is. That's the Pure Land. But this time machine, we grapple with this all the time. Science is doing it right now, the James Webb Telescope. It's a huge time machine, right? When we look out into the skies, we see light coming to our eyes that's long, long ago stopped being sent. We're just seeing the entrails of the light. We're seeing the past. But it isn't the past because we're seeing it now. Now we're seeing something that is long gone. Man, if you want an example for Buddhism, ta-da! This illusion of time. It's fine and well to look at pictures from your vacation 10 years ago, but it isn't real now. Even your memory of it now isn't real. Because if you're looking for the realness of it, it's in your idea of what that memory represents and what you're sensing about it now. That's real. But it isn't in the picture. You're manufacturing it in your mind. This is the central point of Buddhism, is realizing that your whole purpose in life is to emerge this mind of an observer of your own life, fully uncolored by prejudices, predilections, politics, ownership, losing, all of that. That's suffering. Bottom line, plain and simple. All of your drama is created. So if you could just look at everything objectively, you would be then freed from all of those emotions, and they would be completely subsumed in a new emotion, not really an emotion, but a sensation, a full sensation of being, right? Emotion, attachment, sensation happening now. You see the difference, the verbiage? So the Lankavatara is going to spend a lot of time trying to dissect this. And at moments you're going to go, oh crap, I really get that. And at other moments you're going to say, I get that, but the rhetoric sounds like it's trying to hang on to something that isn't there, even though all of the rhetoric is about not hanging on to things that aren't there. It will get maddening, but for the most part, it's a really, really interesting and amazing sutra. It really is. And so as I read it, as I say over and over again to you, I read it from our knowledge, our perspective of self-enlightenment, Lotus Sutra, yeah? And there's a rather long introduction here, but I think because in this introduction, and it doesn't say so literally, but I believe this is an introduction by the author, Daisetz Teitaro Suzuki, that he sets forth his oeuvre, his particular intellectual perception of Mahayana Buddhism. And I think it's instructive in that way, because he hits on a lot of subjects that we've talked about in so many videos, but it's albeit condensed in many ways for this introduction, which is several pages long. So this first video and maybe the second will just be concerned with the introduction, which should be at very least a point of departure for our journey through the Lankavatara. Yeah? Are you ready? Yeah, let's just get into it. What the heck? And as usual, I'll interrupt. For those who've already read my studies in the Lankavatara Sutra, which is published by George Rutledge and Sons in London in 1930, just to give you an idea of the time period here. No special words are needed, because you'll already be well introduced to his way of understanding the Lankavatara and his translations, yeah? But to those who are not yet quite familiar with the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism, an expository introduction to the principal thesis of the Lanka may be welcome. Without something of a preliminary knowledge as to what the sutra proposes to teach, it will be difficult to comprehend the text intelligently. Why is that? For thoughts of deep signification are presented in the most unsystematic manner. As I said in my studies, the Lanka is a memorandum kept by a Mahayana master in which he put down perhaps all the teachings of importance accepted by the Mahayana followers of his day. He apparently did not try to give them any order, and it is possible that the latter redactors were not very careful in keeping faithfully whatever order there was in the beginning, thus giving the text a still more disorderly appearance. The introduction that follows may also serve as one to Mahayana Buddhism generally, which is why I've chosen to go ahead and read it and discuss it with you. Interesting, though, and an important note, I think, is that so far our readings of translations of sutras, of Shakyamuni's teachings, are quite systematic, right? Take the Lotus Sutra, the Threefold Lotus Sutra, the ovation in the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, right? And the chapters within it. And then getting into the Lotus Sutra, there's an instructional part that's turned provisional, and some separate the Lotus Sutra into the first 14 chapters and the latter 14 chapters. Others separate it into 3 different parts. And I even read a Lotus Sutra that was missing an entire chapter. This is a reminder that Kumarajiva was a scholar who was sifting through many, many documents and teachings that represented the sermons of the Lotus Sutra, and eschewing those that didn't fit in with that. So the Lotus Sutra becomes less a book of a sermon that Shakyamuni delivered and more of a compendium of a sermon that he taught for 8 years with different specificities as he traveled for those who were listening to the central sermon. I've said this before, if you're looking for the actual sermon itself, quote unquote, you'll see it in the verse sections of the chapters, because that was the memorization, the rhythm, the chanting, the singing of the sermon. While the expositions around and through those chapters are expositions of the meaning of the sermon for those particular listeners. Time and capacity, remember? And so that's quite elucidating as we study Buddhism in general, that there's the teachings and the elucidations of Shakyamuni captured in repetition, people remembering and memorizing as well as they could the entire, you wanted to hear every word that Shakyamuni had to say, but those areas of verse form were indelible. Those you rehearse those, you repeat them word for word as they are. And then hundreds of years go by before all of this stuff starts to get written down in various languages. So there's lots of room for a little shift here, a little shift there, yeah? But the rhythm, the chant, the song, very little deviation there, right? We can rely on that part. And how many of you have gone through the verse section and thought, oh, I don't remember him talking about this in all of this other verbiage. It's like a new thing, only in the verse section. See, that's important. All right. So, the first part that the author is going to talk about here is he labels the classification of beings. So, all of us have, we've studied, we're studying now, we have hundreds and hundreds of videos here on different sutras and subjects, all pertaining to the beginning of our practice as well as our ongoing practice, and some pretty in-depth stuff as well, So none of this should really come as a surprise, but he's going to give us a purview specifically of Mahayana, in his view, Buddhism, not Hinayana. So there's already quite a distinguishing mark here to where this author begins his discussion of Buddhism. But it's, because this is not Lotus Sutra, not culminating teachings, it still pays attention to early teachings, just from a Mahayana perspective. So you'll pick up on this. From the Mahayana point of view, he goes on, beings are divisible into two heads: those that are enlightened and those that are ignorant. I talk about this all the time, but I haven't said it in this way, so that's interesting. The former are called Buddhas, including also Bodhisattvas, Arhats, and Pratyeka Buddhas, while the latter comprise all the rest of beings under the general designation of Bala, or Bala Prithajana. Bala meaning undeveloped. It's probably a better word than ignorant, because when we hear ignorant in our modern era, we think stupid. But that's not what ignorant means. You know this, even today. But it was especially not meant then. It simply meant undeveloped, unenlightened, unlearned, puerile, or ignorant, and Prithajana, people different from the enlightened. That is, the multitudes, or people of ordinary type, whose minds are found engrossed in the pursuit of egoistic pleasures and unawakened to the meaning of life. Oh, that's probably the most important statement of that whole sentence. That he's defining ignorance as opposed to enlightenment as those who are preoccupied constantly with egoistic pleasures. In other words, attachment, things that identify. And enlightenment being the dividing line, that when you awaken your Buddha-ness, that whole drama of identifying becomes unimportant, undistracting, just part of samsara. Just like all the stuff in the attic. Now that you can see it all, it's easy to discern it as the stuff in the attic. This class is also known as Sarvastava, all beings, or sentient beings. The Buddha wants to help the ignorant, hence the Buddhist teaching and discipline. So, that's the very first definition this author gives us on Buddhist practice. There are two types of human existence, attached and unattached. And in order to be unattached, liberated from all of the foibles of the attachments, is the reason for Buddhism. Okay, quite plain and simple, isn't it? Now he's going to define the Buddha. All the Buddhist teachings unfold themselves around the conception of Buddhahood. And you thought that term didn't come about until the Lotus Sutra. When this is adequately grasped, Buddhist philosophy, with all its complications and super additions, will become luminous. Notice he called it Buddhist philosophy, the way in which we mindfully understand life. Not some spiritual other. What is the Buddha? According to Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, who is the interlocutor of the Buddha in the Lanka, the Buddha is endowed with transcendental knowledge, prajna, perfection of wisdom, Buddha wisdom, if you will, and a great compassionate heart, karunya. Now, think about that for a moment. I know I'm going to repeat myself, but I want to show you that it is in the words here. It is in the teaching. I don't want you to hang on to the words, but I want you to understand that as many ways there are of defining what Buddhism is about, it is throughout all of the teachings. It's not like there's any subtle bomb being exploded in the Lotus or the Lankavatara or anywhere else. It's the same thing. It's just getting it that seems to be the difficulty. We are firmly attached on stuff. It's very hard to get our stubborn minds to let go of everything and just let it be. Sounds like a Beatles song now. With the former, he realizes that this world of particulars has no reality. Not that the world isn't real, but the particulars of it have no reality. The differentiation, the thingifying, the identifying of everything, that's unreal. That's the work of the mind. That's not a real thing. It's really important to get this. It's devoid of any ego substance. That discussion on anatman. There is no soul. There is no mystical receptacle of me-ness, identification that constructs the universe. That's all in the mind, that identification. The universe is universing. It's what it does. It's not thinking about it. And that in this sense, it resembles Maya, or a visionary flower in the air. Right? You can imagine freely, but that doesn't make it so. As thus it is above the category of being and non-being, it is declared to be pure, vishuddha, and absolute, vivikta, and free from conditions, animita. Right? It's free from being animated because the animator is the mind. But the Buddha's transcendental wisdom is not always abiding in his high altitude, because being instigated by an irresistible power which innerly pushes him back into the region of birth and death, moment, he comes down among us and lives with us who are ignorant and lost in the darkness of the passions, attachments. Now this sounds like some other coming down. I mean, this is the language this translator is using, to live amongst us lowly mortals. But remember how we started this discussion? You and I are of two heads, really two minds. Right? Who among us has two heads? Those two heads are in this one. It's the mind he's talking about. And the Buddha mind, the wise mind, the mind of clarity, penetrates this earthly, samsaric mind of humanity, of ignorance, of chasing physicality, emotions, attachments, and imbues us with a different sort of wisdom. There's practical wisdom, eat this, not that. And then there's wisdom of the whole process of life that penetrates all of those things and lifts the weight of their responsibility off of us because they're just the process. See the duality that he's wrestling with here, yes? Nirvana is not the ultimate abode of Buddhahood, nor is enlightenment. Love and compassion is what essentially constitutes the self-nature of the all-knowing one, the Sarvajna. And this is where we could spend a lot of time dissecting this, but this is where he's struggling a little bit, really. Nirvana is not the ultimate abode of Buddhahood, nor is enlightenment. Well, the answer's in the words he chose. Nirvana is not the abode. That's right. It isn't an abode. It isn't a place we go. Nirvana isn't an escape to another land. Remember what we read in the Virmalakirti? The Pure Land is this land. It is no different. It is a perceptive shift, an understanding, a depth of knowledge, wisdom. Can we wrap words around this experience without making it a this or that? The Pure Land is not a separate place from this land we are in. It is a perceptive shift, not an other, but a newly engaged. Turn the light on in the attic, yeah? Enlightenment. So nirvana is not the ultimate abode of Buddhahood. You don't have to go to find this state of Buddhahood. Nor is it enlightenment, because enlightenment isn't the attic. It's the knowing. Love and compassion is what essentially constitutes the self-nature of the all-knowing one. He just tripped over the words. There is no self-nature of anything, but he's using the concept of you can identify your Buddhahood, which is like a nonsense statement, as the process of loving and nurturing, wanting to bring others to wisdom, compassion. So he's saying if you're looking for the personage of Buddha, remember that's what this chapter is trying to define, Buddha is that loving, compassionate expression. No parameters, no other place. But the words are a little bit problematic. So we know this because we understand what self-enlightenment is. We've studied beyond this. But if this was all you had to study and you were reading this guy's description, you might stumble here, as though Buddha was something other, a different thing. It's just a perceptive shift. It's already part of our minds. We're just, our minds are completely preoccupied with the monkeys. We shut the monkeys up and, it's not a different place. It's an enlightened place, just like the dark attic with everything you're going to trip on and step through. When you turn the light on, boop, everything becomes obvious, yeah? So his next chapter, titled The Buddha as Love, not is love, as love. The Buddha's love is not something ego-centered. Maybe that's all that needs to be said there, because I've tried many times to try to dissect that, and you end up in your own word salad, right? How many of you, I can remember as a teenager, entire discussions with friends, what is love? What does it look like? What does it sound? Is it something you can define? Or is it something you just feel? It gets really, really messy very quickly. But I think to say the Buddha's love is not something ego-centered, I think if you just meditated on that for a while, a lot of the verbiage around love would start to fall away, because you'd be measuring it again against, once again, identification. Right? Ask yourself, who's love about? What is love about? Any of those questions. Why love? Any of the 5 W's are ego. Love is a force of integration, an intolerance for non-integration, for differentiation. Love does not differentiate. We try to express that in words, right? What do we hear? Oh, it's such a common cliche. Unconditioned love, unconditional love. Aren't those Buddhist words? Tendencies and conditions. If there are tendencies and conditions in your description of love, then you do not know love. That is ego. That is identification. I am, you are, we are. No. Love is love. Love is an immediate perception of inclusion, non-separateness. It is the enlightenment, yeah? And that all-inclusive, non-differentiating connection, love, by its very nature, is compassionate. See how different that is than conventional dialogue about love and compassion? I want to help you. No, that's ego-based. You are so much more. Let me just function as love, as compassion. Lose the ego. Man, that's hard to materialize in our brains, yeah? That's just the first sentence. It is a will force which desires the acts in the realm of the twofold egolessness. It is above the dualism of being and non-being. It rises from a heart of non-discrimination. It manifests itself in the conduct of purposelessness. It is the Tathagata's great love of all beings, which never ceases until every one of them is happily led to the final asylum of nirvana. For he refuses as long as there is a single unsaved. Now he's going to use the word soul. Damn it. He just got through describing anatman, and he's using the word soul. See how difficult it is to put to words this enlightenment, this practice? To enjoy the bliss of samadhi to which he is entitled by his long spiritual discipline. And all of this is to say, exactly as I stumbled through my own words, it is just about inclusion into the very act of being without the baggage. Leave that baggage there. It doesn't even inform who you are. It's just a path you've traveled. Who you are is right now. Is this magnificent instantiation of you. And in a moment, you'll be gone. And you'll be a new manifestation of you. That liberation, that moment of disconnection from everything that holds us in samsara to observer, that's nirvana. That's not a place. That's not a place to go, something to accomplish. It's a release. Nirvana is the liberation, the emancipation moment. Yeah? The Tathagata is indeed the one who, endowed with a heart of all-embracing love and compassion, regards all beings as if they were his only child. And that comes from other sutras, doesn't it? We've heard this statement before. Because the closest thing our samsaric identity can come up with to this overwhelming sense of dedication to life is really the mother-child relationship. I would argue, yeah, we have a lot of romantic stories about men and their romantic commitment to their children. But I'm a man, and I'm speaking for myself. I don't think I can even understand, other than Buddha. My Buddhahood is the only place I can begin to understand the undefinable link between mother and child. It's not even physical. It transcends physical. It's a link of the formation of life that only a womb, a woman. Yes, I know there's all kinds of pronouns. I don't want to get into that mess. The mother-child relationship, however you conceive of it, is far beyond simple physical anatomy, reproduction. There's a spiritual component there that never leaves a woman, a mother, I will say. And that is something a father can barely know. There can be a lot that attaches a father to a child. Don't misunderstand me. But there's a limit. And that limit, and I could go on for hours talking about the tacit, the tangible limits of that. And I will just say right now, most of the world's laws, and certainly all of the world's religions, are men's attempt at usurping that mother's spirituality, connection, power. Because in the world of samsara, of identification, that mother power is totally intimidating to men who don't have it. You just don't have it. Men's only reference to that power is the power of might, of building, of seeing, of being visionary. But all of that, building cities and engines and spaceships, still pales in the simple biology of a mother. Can't compete. Cannot compete. Why colonize the moon? Why endeavor to colonize Mars. The rockets are like sperm, and the heavenly bodies are like wombs. Man is constantly trying to compare, contrast, outdo what a breeding womb, a mother, does by its own nature. This is the man-woman thing. And if you want to have a discussion about that, we could do a whole other bunch of videos about it. But I'm just offering it up as something to consider. Because the equanimity that I constantly talk about, and what he's talking about here is Buddha love, is a state of understanding of life that is not individuated by male or female, mother or father. This is why the example of an all-embracing love and compassion regards all beings as if they were his only child. It's still a fumbling rhetoric around understanding that all of the universe has that embrace. It's not male or female. It's not boy or girl. It is that all-encompassing, embracing love and compassion that comes from simply being. It's not conditioned by male, female, father, mother. Those are tendencies and conditions instantiating themselves. Buddhahood transcends that. It's not male or female. It is the stuff from which male and female eventually manifest. If he himself enters into nirvana, no work will be done in the world where discrimination goes on and multitudinous prevails. Same thing I just said. The world of discriminations, identification. For this reason, he refuses to leave this world of relativity, calling out Einstein. All his thoughts are directed towards the ignorant and suffering masses of beings for whom he is willing to sacrifice his enjoyment of absolute reality and self-absorption, samadhi, sukhabhuta kotya vinishvajra. I'm sure I butchered that. So, Buddhahood, Buddha-ness, remains amongst samsara because of its great compassion to single-mindedly elevate everyone to this Buddhahood. So once again, I remind you, Buddhahood cannot occur any other place and time but in this moment of your samsaric sentient mind. Only the sentient mind can experience Buddha-ness through the release of this attachment mechanism, not the annihilation of everything that we're attached to, but the simple shift of perspective, nirvana, of being without ownership, and seeing the amazing process of life moment to moment. Buddhahood. Next chapter is skillful means. So how does Buddha love function in this realms, the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment, of ignorance, of everything but Buddha. That will leave to the next video. So we'll start with skillful means. So there are things to be critical of in this author's introduction, but it's quite clarifying to see where his point of view it begins, right? Shaping our understanding of the sutra we're about to read with specificity toward his transcription of it. So we can pay attention where we see this influencing or uninfluencing more or less as we go. Yeah? All right. That's going to be it for this one. Thank you. Thank you for, please, if you can, like this video. More importantly even is to subscribe, because it helps the algorithm make this teaching more available to more people. It's easier to find. Google will make it, oh, look, people are looking at this. Let's show it up in more searches. That's incredibly helpful to our Bodhisattva mission of propagation, yeah? And let other minds decide whether or not this is for them or if they're ready for it. Right? Not me, but the teachings, yeah? Okay. In the meantime, you're amazing that you're practicing and that you're here, that you're listening, that you're thinking, that your practice is everything. So thank you for that. Thank you, patrons, for helping pay the bills. Amazing, through Patreon or through PayPal me, paypal.me/Sifu. However you can do that, if you can do that, is amazing. I'm totally grateful. We are totally grateful, right? And in the meantime, take care of your health, right? You can't practice so good if you're not healthy. Bodhidharma would tell you that. All right. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now.